What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, July 18th, 2018, middle of the week, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday, and whatever insanity is waiting there for us as well. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The talking points list is full. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, observations, opinions, and so forth. So a quick reminder that tomorrow our third hour guest is Leon Siu, who's the foreign minister for the Kingdom of Hawaii, and he's going to be giving us an update on the movement to have the world recognize that there still is a sovereign nation of Hawaii, despite the U.S. Game planning. And apparently we already have a caller on the line, so let's just get that call taken care of. Francis in Montreal, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I wanted to talk briefly about the big elephant in the room that the press, especially the Democrats, are deliberately ignoring from the Helsinki joint press conference with Putin and Trump. And the story that's not being reported is, or it's being deliberately buried, is that Putin said, he invited Mueller to send his agents over to interview the indicted Russians, but he wanted it in exchange for something else. He wanted Russian agents to go to the United States and interview people who are involved with a massive money laundering scheme. Because back in the day when Russia was being looted, there was about $1.5 billion that was looted by Bill Browder.
Yes.
And this is a guy who should be on the map with George Soros, because he's a big international Jewish mafia criminal. And so is his father. And what Putin basically said is that Hillary Clinton's campaign laundered $400 million in illegal money for this Bill Browder guy. And they didn't just launder it, they took it. It just disappeared into their pockets.
Okay, well, we need to issue one correction on this because apparently there was a mistake by the translator, and the actual amount was just 400,000, not 400 million. But it's still illegal, it's still a crime, and Hillary is trying to distract everybody away from it by going on the attack against Donald Trump, tweeting out, well, we know what team he plays for. And, of course, that team would be the American people, which is not who the liberal Democrats are playing for.
Yep. Well, it's a joke to watch them
Hello, did we lose you? Francis, are you there?
I'm on my end. Yeah, he dropped.
He dropped. Oh, okay. We're having our own little bit of tech issues this morning as well here. All right, so getting on back to the news, the sound and fury over the Putin-Trump summit is continuing. And Trump appeared to back off and say, yes, it could have been Russia. I believe in the intelligence agencies. And that only renewed the attacks against him. So now he's backing off the backing off. And he's back out there saying that, yeah, there's a deep state plot to get him. Russia was not involved. I mean, we know that China was getting emails from Hillary Clinton, and Chinese money was flowing into Hillary Clinton's campaign. But nobody is really looking at that. Again, that double standard and hypocrisy. We're going to go after the Republicans, and but the Democrats are off limits. No matter what the Democrats do, you can't touch them. Oh, you're un-American if you touch them here. And basically, the haters, the Trump haters, would rather go to war with Russia than get along. And Trump has abandoned any pretense of apology for the press conference and claims higher ends of intelligence support him. But we're seeing, again, this Trump derangement syndrome is on full view. The deep state, the institutional government absolutely want to get rid of him. And I don't think they're going to wait for 2020. It's not feeling like this is the start of a slow ramp up to 2020. I think they're going to try and get him out just as quickly as they can. And there was that Democrat in Congress the other day who literally stood up and said, we've got to get rid of Trump and Pence, and we've got to put Hillary Clinton in the Oval Office. That would be a coup d'etat. That's not how this country is supposed to work if you read your Constitution. If both Trump and Pence are gone, the Speaker of the House is next in line for the White House. Now, Tucker Carlson was out there saying that there's a lot of interference in a lot of elections around the world. And certainly one of the worst offenders is the United States. Pardon me. And Tucker Carlson made a point of highlighting Mexico's interference in U.S. elections with all these illegal immigrants who are voting. And CNN's Paul Reyes attacked Tucker Carlson, said he's racist. You know, you're racist for pointing out that illegal immigrants are voting in this country. Illegal isn't a race, and it is a problem. But it's like, with precious few exceptions, and Tucker Carlson is one of them, the entire corporate media are fully on board of this constant demonization of the President of the United States of America. I don't think there's ever been a president who has had this much negative press from the entire corporate media in history. Even in the worst days of Watergate, there were still newspapers out there defending what Richard Nixon had done. When the Washington Post was working on the Watergate story, most other newspapers just looked the other way. And there is another movie that's out here today about how the Knight Ridder newspapers got it right, saying there weren't weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We were lied into that war. And sadly, it's not doing all that well at the box office. It's a good movie. Claire and I watched it the other night. I'm blanking on the name. But Rob Reiner directed it, also stars it. Stellar cast, a lot of really good people. Took a lot of courage to make this movie. And I'm sure the corporate media is dissing it, and they want it to go away because it's a reminder of how the corporate media did, in fact, stand, for the most part, shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. government and feed you that line of bovine excrement about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Now, Ron Paul is talking about the corporate media panic over the Trump-Putin meeting, and he says there is a secret government that likes to control things, whether you call it the deep state or the SES. It's the institutional bureaucracy that wants to be in charge, and their attitude is congressmen come and congressmen go, presidents come and presidents go. We're really in charge of the nation and making sure that we're headed in the right direction, which at the moment appears to be war with Russia and China here. And over at juancole.com, he had an article that pointed out one of the glaring hypocrisies going on, because the DC elites and the corporate media are just ragging on Trump's bromance with Putin. But Netanyahu gets a free pass. Netanyahu's been meeting with Putin, but if you look at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's guilty of most of the same infractions held against Putin. Netanyahu openly campaigned for the Republican candidates in 2012 and 2016. He openly interfered in U.S. politics by insisting on addressing Congress to derail the Iran nuclear deal. And again, everyone's still screaming about Russia trying to steal Crimea. Well, Israel's trying to steal Palestine, and nobody says anything about that. So the hypocrisy is just absolutely stunning. Now, apparently, Donald Trump did an interview for Fox News that was videoed, taped, before he went to the summit. And Trump refused to call Russia an adversary in the interview, slammed John Brennan, and questioned the timing of these 12 indictments of Putin's agents for supposedly meddling in 2016. And again, Mueller is grandstanding again. He's not going to accept the Russian offer to go to Russia and interview them. This is the second time he's pulled this. He's just come out with indictments which don't require proof and have no proof in them, and just sits back saying they're never going to come to the United States to defend themselves. Although in the case of the first round of these indictments, yeah, they did. They showed up. And Mueller hit the panic button, tried to deny the defense attorneys the right of discovery. tried to get the courts to seal all the records. They're getting desperate out there. In fact, it's desperation on the cusp of madness out there, and it's tearing our nation apart. And everybody in the corporate media and the federal government seems to think this is okay, or even the state level governments. It's all starting to fragment here. Now, isn't it interesting that the same media prostitutes and correspondents who were warning us that Trump was going to get us into a war right after he got elected, now they're pushing for a war with Russia? In August of 2017, liberal foreign policy asked, can anyone stop Trump if he decides to start a nuclear war? In that same month, the Boston Globe lamented, it's far too easy for Donald Trump to start a nuclear war. Again, in August of 2017, Uber left Guardian fretted, Trump has taken us to the brink of nuclear war. Can he be stopped? And then in November of last year, the far left Vox reported, Trump can't start a nuclear war by himself, but there's not much stopping him. MSNBC's Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski voiced concern earlier this year. Trump would get America into a nuclear exchange with North Korea. But now, after the Putin-Trump summit, some of these same left-wing prostitutes and correspondents are clamoring for the president to declare Putin's 2016 election meddling an act of war, which requires some kind of a military response. One of those was CNN's Chris Cuomo. We've got to do something. Chris is out there. He said the big, ugly, white elephant in the room is the U.S. election hacking. Well, Chris, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We're going to take another phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Wouldn't be here's your gun and your mic. It'd be where's your bunker?
True. True.
Paper. I mean, how stupid are these people? I mean, Mike. We know we've been following this for a long time, right? Like this whole bankers wars. We have reached a point. I mean, my God, you're dealing with another nuclear power. I mean, of propaganda now. Come on now. Wolf Blitzer, did you see him with Rand Paul? Kept interrupting Rand Paul.
Yes.
Rand Paul was saying, we know John Brennan's a piece of crap. The guy is a piece of garbage. They're all pieces of garbage, Mike. They don't care about this country. They don't care about the American people. They don't care about any people.
Except themselves.
But Mike, they bomb other babies in Yemen and Syria and Iraq. They laugh. They laugh like Hillary did with Gaddafi.
Yes.
It's psychotic, Mike. It's just sad what's going on now. Hey man, we're at the point where they're calling for a coup.
Yeah.
Come on now. I don't know, man. Where's the Patriots in the CIA, Mike, and the FBI and the NSA? Where's the good apples? We've seen the bad apples dropping out because we're seeing them with our own. People need to come out now.
I think the good apples.
Wait.
The good apples got sick and tired and left long ago, because I remember when I started all of this 24 years ago, and I kept saying, I'll just get this information out there, and the good people within Department of Justice and FBI will stand up and say, yes, there's evidence here that Vince Foster was murdered. It never happened. And I've given up waiting for there to be good apples inside the government. I'm sure there are probably a few in very low positions, but the entire upper echelons of all of these agencies are totally corrupt.
But Mike, there's got to be enough good apples to where if they all come out at once, you can't stop them all. You know what I mean? The Wolf Blitzers, the Fox News, Sean Hannity's. Tucker Carlson, even Sean Hannity to a point, at least stood up for something. But they still. I don't know. Mark Levin. He's like Michael Savage on the talk radio. He brings up. He's wrong though. He brings up like Georgia and Ukraine. We all know, or Cuba. They bring up Cuba. I'm like, yeah. Well, they don't mention we put, like, was it the Persian twos in Turkey? That's what caused the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's exactly what caused the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, they don't tell us what caused them to react, the Russians, right, or the Soviet Union. They don't tell you Ukraine, we was behind the coup. They don't tell you Saakashvili in Georgia attacked South Ossetia and killed Russian peacekeepers. I mean,
no,
from the UN.
That's how the corporate media does it. You know, they're going to demonize the designated enemy. We see that reporting all the time from Israel and Palestine, where they'll always report on, oh, the Palestinians did this and the Palestinians did that, and they never mention the provocation by Israel that preceded all of these events. And that's what the corporate media does. And thankfully, that's why their audience is very much in decline.
But, Mike, Trump has the ability to touch the American people by using emergency broadcast system in a way, right? I mean, he can interrupt the television, can he? He can override the television because we're in a pivotal point, Mike. I mean, you know, we haven't. Mike, I'm 48 years old. I had never seen anything like this. I mean,
well, I'm coming up on my 66th birthday. I've never seen anything like this. Claire and I were just talking this morning that the uncivility, the chaos, the confusion, the rancor is escalating more and more rapidly.
And you got to put yourself in Russia's shoes. I mean, you know, they're looking at, or Europe, an unstable United States now, a half-baked banana republic that's got infighting and like you said, a fracturing of the government. Like, you know, like I said earlier, like not today, but a while ago, like who's controlling the nuclear football? Who's control? I mean, you have a fracturing going on. This is scary stuff. I mean, this is no joke now. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's just we're reaching to a point like something's going on here because we've been moving forward to this. At this point, it's crazy now. Like, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, Mike. I mean,
well, I've been saying all along that what I foresee happening is a Soviet Union-style collapse of our central government. And obviously, the collapse doesn't happen overnight, where everything's just hunky-dory on one day, and the very next day it just collapses and it's gone. It's obviously preceded by more and more symptoms of the government factionalizing and coming apart, and that's the phase that we're in right now.
And you know what's sad? How come we know this stuff? But yet, these elements in our own government, the elements of the CIA, NSI, DIA, how come they don't know this stuff? They do, or they're scared, or they're with that, you know, the establishment. But the rank and file American, not all of them, but we know, you know this stuff, and your listeners, and I know this stuff, but I mean, it's not hard to figure out what's going on. But I mean, my God, start speaking out because you can't keep pushing this crap because it's going to, like, result in a response from the Russians because we're untrustworthy now, Mike. I mean, you know, Putin and the Russian government saying, hey, man, who the hell are we talking to? You know, I mean,
you know, we don't need to worry. We don't need to worry about Russia trying to bring down the United States of America. Russia just needs to kick back, have a cold one, and let the U.S. government basically implode, commit suicide, because that's the path that it's very much on. The U.S. clearly is desperate to have a scapegoat on which to blame the coming hard times, and because they've saved themselves with a world war twice before, they think they can do it a third time. But I think the rest of the world understands that's actually what the U.S. agenda is. And it would be foolish to go up against either Russia or China because of our depleted state of our military, the very good state of their military, and certainly risking nuclear war. There are some voices that are starting to speak out and say, we really cannot do this. And we'll be talking about that a little later in the show. Anyway, Dustin, we need to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And yes, Republic Broadcasting does need your support. Republic Broadcasting wants you. And we literally are in a war. It's in virtual space. It's on the internet. But it is a war, and we've had all these big social media giants declare war on us because they don't like what we're saying. They don't like the fact that people are listening to us, and that they're going after our advertisers, they're going after our servers, and we do need your help. It's just that simple. So the postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call in with a credit or debit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during normal business hours, extension 3 at all other times. All right, let's go on back here to the phones. Oh, the phone lines are really loading up here. Anthony in Arizona. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good morning, or just afternoon.
For me, it's still morning.
Yeah, my experience started back there when in Ohio in 1938 when a group of Democratic people by Nate Silverberg, Max Goldberg, Bunowitz, and one of my brothers to be adopted. They were discussing how they were going to control all the American people's movement by the food supply being taxed, so where they control the people's movement by taxing their heartbeat. And then it went into the Second World War, which was caused by the same people who formed the Federal Reserve Bank system, and they made a deal with England to get the United States into the First World War in order to get Palestine.
Well, that was one objective, but the main objectives of both World War I and World War II were to basically crush Germany, which was proving to be a competitor to both Great Britain and the United States in places like science and manufacturing. And rather than invest the time and money to improve their own industry and science, nations just find it easier to bomb their competitors back into rubble, which is what the U.S. has been doing to all kinds of countries over the last 17 years. So you're absolutely right about the private central banks, especially in World War II, because they absolutely hated Germany's new economy, where Germany shut down the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles, and they set up a new public currency based on a unit of value, and Germany's economy just lit up like a Christmas tree. It was called the German miracle.
Yes.
And the private central bankers of the world were terrified that the rest of the world was going to say, let's do what they're doing because it seems to work for the nation and the people. And so that's when the desire to go after Germany yet again was decided on.
Well, then what they did, and the same people who were engineering all of those movements because of Germany's success, they formed the FBI, which is their organization, the CIA, the National Security Administration. Then they formed Homeland Security, which was done by Michael Chertoff, and it was...
Boy, did he make money off of that.
Yes, well, he even, I believe, is the one that wrote up Patriot Act 1 and 2, which now forced every American to almost take their clothes off to get on an airplane.
And Chertoff now runs the Chertoff Group, which sells airport scanners and rubber gloves and chemical swabs and all the rest of it. So he's laughing all the way to the bank on that one.
So, as I say, our main three enemies are the United Nations, which was formed by Al Gore Hess, who was they should have pursued his criminal charges, and he should have been either been executed for treason. and then Mr. Truman adopts the United Nations, of which they're using that thing to control the world. But like I say, my experience, even in Tucson, Arizona, is that these people have control. We even have a Mr. Rothschild, our mayor. They have an airport that they run. They only pay $1 a year for it, and they're making people pay $300, $400 just for a space every month. And then none of that money goes into...
No two ways about it. It's a racket. All right, well, listen, Anthony, thank you very much for the phone call. We've got to take another break.
I have one more important thing to tell you.
We've got to take a break for commercial. I'm sorry. We've got to take a break for commercial. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take 2 more phone calls, then we're going to close the phone lines for a while because I got a lot of news to get through here. So let's go to Michael in Memphis. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, it's Mitchell, but that's all right. Listen, I wanted to ask you about the social contract, but first I wanted to talk about a word that I think a lot of people would like to know. It's called kakistocracy. Kakistocracy is a system of government which is run by the worst, least qualified, or most unscrupulous citizens.
Well, that sounds familiar.
That's what we have.
Yeah.
That's what we have. Not a democracy, not anything. It's called a kakistocracy. That's where we are. I wanted to ask you, Michael, about the social contract. I think you subscribe to it. I don't. I'm along with the lines of Kathleen from Paris, I think. She's a voluntarist.
Yes.
You talk about the social contract. I think that's of Jean-Jacques Rousseau or maybe Thomas Hobbes or somebody. But it's sort of the quid pro quo, the arrangement that we are obligated because the government gives certain services and so forth. You spoke about a month or so ago of the idea that the social contract has been breached.
Yes.
Especially if we go back to 1913.
Yes.
Breached ever since. All to 2018. It's still being breached in that regard, at least. And it's been breached in all kinds of ways. So I think you were maintaining that the government loses its authority if that social contract is breached, hence making it null and void.
Well, basically, the government, and it's not just going back to 1913, it goes back to that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Those are the rules under which we, the American people, allow the government to be caretaker of our sovereignty. And whenever the government strays outside those rules and restrictions, it delegitimizes itself. And these days, it's very easy to see they have completely broken that contract. The First Amendment's under attack. They wanted an Israel exception. Second Amendment under constant attack. Fourth Amendment virtually being ignored. Same thing with the Fifth Amendment. They're ignoring the 10th Amendment. And you have people like George Bush saying that the Constitution is just a blankety-blank piece of paper, which shows you the disdain our rulers have for the contract, because I consider that Constitution the original contract with America.
If I could, you mentioned many times the Supreme Court ruling of John Baddock and what is it, the United States?
Yes.
And also I think it's Plumer or Plummer in Indiana, but a lower court or whatever. But the point is that what does that say if, say, police officers are outside of their authority, or in the case of what you just talked about, the social contract is null and void, it's been breached, it's delegitimized government. So does John Baddock, would that ruling apply here? So what I'm saying is, does anybody in government have any authority over us at all? Why should I respect the president if the contract's been null and void?
Well, go back to the Declaration of Independence, where government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. And that means that the government has those authorities that we, the people, allow them to have as set forth in that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And it's not just the authorities. There's restrictions on how the government may behave.
Okay, one last thing, and because I know I'll make it brief. The consent of the governed is a reductio ad absurdum or an oxymoronic comment. You can either consent to something or you can be governed. Government, gubernare means to control. Okay, so if you're under control, you do not have agency. You do not have the ability to consent. You can either consent to something or you can be controlled. It's an impossible. It's like building 7. It can either crush itself or it can fall at free fall acceleration. It cannot do both, is what NIST claims to this day, which is a lie. So you can either consent
Mitchell, when our country was set up, it was set up so that we, the people, still had control over it. We had honest and fair elections. The states had the vast majority of the authority. Local communities' power was dispersed evenly across the land. The central government existed only to arbitrate between the states and to provide for a defense in time of war. That's it. But the central government really began to take off after the Civil War here. So the government has outgrown its lawful authority a long, long, long time ago. And we can withhold our consent, and for obvious practical reasons, we want to be very peaceful and careful while we're doing it. But I think people in a mature society where the government's job is to organize for the population what the population needs but cannot organize for themselves, that the citizens are going to consent to be governed in terms of we're going to build a bridge here, we're going to build a highway here, we're going to put a rail line here, and that sort of thing. Anyway, Mitchell, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call, then I need to get back to the news. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, how you doing?
Doing fine.
Okay. I think the problem with Trump, at least half the problem with Trump, is himself. Now, if you go back 10 years ago and look at some of the interviews and the way he was, the way he carried himself, and the way he was respected by people like myself and others, and comparing him now, it's like night and day. I mean, for a guy that's 72 years old, he acts like a kid. He's impulsive. Not only that, he picked the wrong people to help him when he became president. So half the problem is himself.
Well, I think Trump was basically constrained to pick the advisors he did as political payoffs to his donors. We know that Sheldon Adelson pulled a lot of those names up and said, you got to have this guy. I gave you all this money for your campaign. You wouldn't be president without me. And so Trump basically allowed himself to be surrounded by the alligators and water moccasins of the swamp itself. And it was a mistake. But on the other hand, he did have to pay back his political favors, especially if he's thinking of running again in 2020.
Right. But don't you agree that his behavior is quite different than it was maybe 10 years ago?
10 years ago, he wasn't the president. And if you're asking, has it gone to his head a little bit? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But as a private citizen, he carried himself as a very humble, very gracious individual. But now he's acting like a young kid. He's impulsive. And not only that, if he stopped tweeting and just basically kept quiet for a while, he might get more respect that way.
You're right on that one. I mean, I'm appreciative that the president has a way of communicating with the American people that does not go through the corporate media filters. But there are times when I think, for the dignity of the office, he should exercise a little more restraint.
Right, and we both can agree with that. So, Michael, you take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to close the phone lines for a while. And I'm going to get back to some news. So we were talking about how the very same liberal pundits who were screaming, Trump is going to get us into a war, Trump is going to get us into a war, are now saying, yes, we need to get into a war. Trump needs to, he should have, picked a fight with Putin at the summit. And what's wrong with him? He's committing treason by not goading Russia into a fight. And now we're hearing all these Democrats are out there trying to equate the alleged but still unproven Russian meddling in the 2016 election as an act of war. They're equating it to Pearl Harbor, where 2,403 Americans died, and now those deaths are being casually compared to an alleged cybercrime. And so to say, that was the act of war. That was Russia's act of war against us. That was the Pearl Harbor. We have to act now. And they're urging a cyber attack on the Moscow banks in retaliation. So, I mean, if we get into a cyber war with Russia or with anybody, it's going to wreck the entire planet. It's going to wreck the entire internet. It's going to ruin businesses. It's going to be a disaster. Now, MSNBC had a breaking news report They had found and exposed a Russia-linked Twitter account. See, we have the proof. We have the proof here. And apparently, they went for this fake Antifa account. It was actually a parody account. And it listed itself as having a Vladivostok, Russia location on the tweet. And apparently, the geniuses over at MSNBC don't understand that you can put down any place as your location. There's no system that guarantees that the tweet is actually coming from the location of the person posting the tweet. You could say that you're in Vladivostok. You could say you're on the moon. Now, Paul Craig Roberts is out there with a very sober article. Is President Trump a traitor because he wants peace with Russia? Of course not. Peace is a good thing here. And Paul Craig Roberts is out there with a dose of reality. Russia is a superpower. Russian weapons are superior to the junk produced by the waste-filled U.S. military-industrial complex that lives high on the hog off of the American taxpayer. It's questionable if the U.S. is even a second-class military power. I mean, look how much trouble we're having in places like Afghanistan and Syria. We pretty much lost Syria. Now they're talking about direct talks with the Taliban in Afghanistan and pulling out of there. How do you think we're going to do against a military peer like Russia or China? And Paul Craig Roberts goes on to say, if these insane neoconservatives such as Max Boot, William Kristol, and the rest of these people get their way, the U.S., Great Britain, and Europe will be a radioactive ruin for thousands of years. That's really what is at stake, and we need to be paying attention to this. All right. As you know, one of the vectors for the attack on Donald Trump has been accusations that he may have revealed U.S. secrets to Putin during their 2-hour private meeting. Oh, he's damaged national security. He's a Russian agent. We've got to have that. So Democratic Representative Bill Pascrell now wants to bring in the translator, the State Department translator, who was in that room with Trump and with Putin, basically to make sure that everything got through correctly. He wants to bring her in to testify before Congress under oath and basically ask her what was talked about privately between Putin and Trump, which sort of negates the whole point of a high-level summit where, pardon me, leaders get to have a private, honest talk. And this is another fishing expedition. It's almost, you get a sense of hysteria out there in their desperation to just find somebody or something on Donald Trump here. Anyway, social media is still out there talking about Putin's bombshell about how U.S. intelligence helped to move $400,000 to the Clinton campaign. And again, it's 400,000, not 400 million. That was a translation botcha. But it doesn't matter the amount of the money. It was still illegal and highly unethical. And Hillary Clinton's trying to basically make it go away by going on the attack against Donald Trump, saying, well, we know what team he plays on. Basically, they're back to accusing him of being a Russian stooge. Let's talk about that Uranium One deal again there, Hillary. How about we do that? Now, over in the congressional hearings, Lisa Page, who we hear is seeking an immunity deal, has basically tossed her former lover, Peter Strzok, under the bus and told Congress that their text messages, quote, mean exactly what they say, end quote. So they were really talking about these things. Now, there's been a new revelation about Peter Strzok. The other day we were talking about how it turns out he was working for both the FBI and the CIA at the same time in counterterrorism. It turns out he actually grew up in Iran. His father was a diplomat, Peter Strzok II. And so basically went to school in Iran and then later on worked as Obama and Brennan's envoy to the Iranian regime. So there's a lot more to him than we were given to understand. He's a player. He's definitely a player. Now, Donald Trump came on out and basically accused Peter Strzok of working with Barack Obama to take down the Trump campaign. And of course, Obama's out there saying, how dare you, how dare you? And Peter Strzok is saying, how dare you, twice over, with a cherry on top. But as you know, Judicial Watch is getting more and more of these text messages out of the Department of Justice. With all these lawsuits, they're having to go to court. Nobody's turning over any of this information voluntarily. And some of the new text messages do confirm the Obama White House was involved with the Trump campaign spying. There is a there in Spygate. But Lou Dobbs over on his show is out there bemoaning there's no consequences for the FBI or the Department of Justice. And he says, who's running the Republic? At this point, I'd have to say it doesn't look like it's the President of the United States of America, because I keep waiting for him to put on those presidential brass knuckles and get down to work on this country. Stop mucking about with all these other countries. We've got problems here, and that's your job. Now, former CIA Chief Brennan is out there saying that the intelligence community may start withholding vital intelligence from Trump in order to protect information that Trump is now seen as a national security risk. Well, if the whole purpose of the intelligence community is to make sure the president and other decision makers in Congress do have all the relevant information they need. And it's ridiculous to say that CIA gets to pick and choose the intelligence. Now, there is a precedent for that. Leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor, there was a program called MAGIC, where the U.S. intelligence had cracked the Japanese codes. One of the big lies about Pearl Harbor was we couldn't read their codes. Yeah, they were cracked, and the whole program was called MAGIC. And they built a machine, sort of a forerunner or a parallel to Enigma, where they were getting decoded messages from Japan and the embassy almost as fast as the intended recipients did. But at one point, because one of the transcripts was found in a White House trash can, Franklin Roosevelt was taken off the MAGIC list. Anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, do you remember CrowdStrike? CrowdStrike was the company hired by the Hillary Clinton campaign to provide IT security for the DNC servers and the email and so forth and so on. And right after the WikiLeaks blowout, Hillary and the DNC accused Russian hackers of breaking into their computer and stealing the information to give to WikiLeaks. And the only, you'll pardon the expression, evidence they offered was an analysis by CrowdStrike that said, yes, we found indications that Russia did it. And other computer security companies immediately criticized the methodology, said it's not reliable. You really have not made the case, to the point where CrowdStrike eventually withdrew its analysis. So as of right now, there actually is no documentation anywhere, real or forged, that supports the idea Russia hacked the DNC computers. Now remember, both Hillary and the DNC refused to allow the servers to be inspected forensically by the FBI or the NSA, who are the experts in this sort of thing. Meanwhile, other analysts have pointed to the metadata on the files at WikiLeaks and said it couldn't have been taken off over the internet. Somebody put it on a high-speed thumb drive and walked it out of the building, more than likely Seth Rich. And Julian Assange hinted strongly, didn't say it, hinted strongly that Seth Rich was his source. Now it's turning out that the analyst working for CrowdStrike, who wrote up that original report blaming Russia, once worked for Robert Mueller at the FBI, and in fact at one point was personally promoted by Mueller. So there's another strand in the web of corruption. Now, James Comey, now that he's no longer working for the U.S. government and immune from the Hatch Act, is out there campaigning and saying, you know, all who believe in this country's values must vote for the Democrats. Lifelong Republican James Comey is basically telling Americans, vote GOP out of office next election. If you're a true American, if you're a patriot, you'll vote Democratic. You can almost smell the desperation that's coming on out there. And I'll tell you one of the reasons they may be panicking. As you know, the polls are shifting against the Democrats, and the more childish they behave, the worse it gets. But an early indicator that the midterms may not be very good for the Democrats is in the fundraising, because the GOP fundraising is going great guns, the money is rolling on in, and the Democrats are scrambling for cash. Now, analysts have shown previously that having a lot of money doesn't always get you a lot more votes. But early on, the money tends to go to the candidate who is believed to be the most likely winner or the most popular. And so looking at the fundraising numbers, things are not good. And I can understand why the Democrats might be hitting the panic button right now. They suffered a major setback in 2016. They may be looking at a major setback in November, absent massive vote fraud, which we'll get into later in the show, and illegal immigrant voting. So it's a serious, serious problem out there. Now, do you remember that gallery, that art gallery up in Portland that had that artwork showing President Trump being beheaded ISIS style? They've been forced to take the artwork down. Now, the headline says, oh, the owner received death threats, gosh darn those Trump supporters. But further on in, it says that actually the landlord who owned the building where the gallery rents a space asked for it to be taken down. So there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be back with hour two after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we were talking briefly in the last hour about Seth Rich, and it's worth going over that case. He was gunned down blocks from his home on July 10th of 2016, and immediately declared he was the victim of a robbery. Now, this was at 4 in the morning, and most robberies happen in the early evening when there are people out there to rob. So that's one area to be suspicious. Seth Rich was shot twice in the back, and he was still wearing a $2,000 gold necklace and watch. He still had his wallet, keys, and phones. He was not a victim of a robbery. And this has all the earmarks of a hit, and no one's been charged. But apparently, according to some sources, Metropolitan Police were told by their higher-ups if they spoke about the case, they would be fired immediately. And it's been claimed that this order came down from very high up in the food chain, well above the District of Columbia's mayor's office. Which is no surprise. We knew it was an assassination. We know there's a cover-up. There's always a cover-up here. Now, here is where things are going to get interesting. We have been told over and over and over again that America's electronic voting machines are secure. They can't be hacked. They can't be remotely accessed unless Russia's doing it. Then Russia can do it. And apparently, the nation's largest voting machine vendor, ES&S Systems, has finally admitted in a letter to Senator Ron Wyden that there is, in fact, remote access software installed in their systems. It's PC Anywhere. And they're claiming it's only there so that the machines can be remotely diagnosed and fixed. But obviously, there is an issue there where the voting machines do have an open portal where somebody could sit in a van outside of a polling place and one by one access all those voting machines and just change the numbers. Again, you need to go back and see that HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy. Now, if you go to my website and you go up to that little gray list of stories right near the top, And you will see there's an entry there right under my picture, how to have honest elections. And I wrote this a while back when Donald Trump was seriously talking about fixing our broken election system. And I put forward a plan. And I've had a lot of people write me from other countries saying, yeah, that's a lot of what we do. We need an election system that makes it very difficult to rig elections, very difficult to hide the rigging. I'm not going to claim this system is foolproof. But our current system is seemingly designed to facilitate and conceal massive election fraud. And I'm wondering why Trump isn't looking at that, because it is an important issue. If he doesn't deal with it decisively, he's going to be a single-term president. All right, let's talk about the war zones. There are so many of them. Apparently, the militants are on full retreat in southern Syria, and the Syrian Arab Army and its allies have liberated Al-Hara, Nimr, Al-Saij, and the hills of Hara and Amr, as well as some other points in the area north of Daraa city. And the town of Nawa has remained one of the key militant defense points in the area, and now they've had to abandon it. Meanwhile, there are reports that some of the FSA units in the area have requested a ceasefire and negotiations to reach a comprehensive reconciliation agreement. They're tired of fighting. They're ready to basically say, let's have a bargain. Now, the Syrian army has also liberated another group of settlements east of Golans. Al-Maj, Agrabath, Al-Amiyah, and the surrounding hills. Interestingly enough, in one of the Al-Qaeda bases in rebel-held Syria, the Syrian Arab Army has found yet another huge cache of U.S. weapons. And somebody there has a sense of humor, because they issued a thank you to the Trump administration for all the tons of U.S. weapons and ammo delivered to the Syrian Arab Army. Because obviously they're going to grab it and they're going to use it here. Up in Ukraine, Poroshenko, following the NATO summit, is out there saying Ukraine is ready to defend our land even if we must do it alone. Well, so far, Ukraine is doing all the aggressing into Lugansk and Donetsk. But of course, all leaders have to claim to be the victim of the war to get popular support here. Now, here's an interesting little footnote on the NATO summit. The NATO summit has instructed all of its member states to get rid of their Russian weapons. Just get rid of them, and they have this long statement about fostering innovation to maintain our technological edge. Actually, what it is, they're telling NATO, buy American. Don't buy the Russian weapons, buy the American weapons. We need the money to go to America and not to Russia. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. There has been a bit of an embarrassment over in Great Britain, and it relates to this Novichok. And to recap, you had this former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia, who were supposedly attacked with Novichok, but recovered, despite it being very, very deadly. And everyone's saying, oh, it's Russia, Russia, Russia. Then we had this other couple who seemed to be nobodies. One was a registered drug addict, and she died after falling ill from what was claimed to be exposure of Novichok. And when they went in to search this guy's house, they found the bottle of Novichok. And tests at Porton Down have confirmed the substance in the bottle is Novichok, according to Scotland Yard. And they're now trying to confirm it's the same batch that poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal. So Neil Basu, head of UK counterterrorism, said this is a significant and positive development. But it's an embarrassment. Nobody knows why this guy had this stuff. But he's not Russian. He's British. He's not part of somebody's intelligence network. I don't know. Maybe he was out by Porton Down and he just found the bottle. didn't realize what it was. But that's where they are with that. Down in Israel, rather bad news. Israeli army warplanes have attacked the Gaza Strip again, threatening the ongoing ceasefire. And this followed reports that a Palestinian fire balloon had drifted across the fence, and as usual, no casualties, nobody got hurt. The Israeli army has been told to prepare for a large-scale military operation against the Gaza Strip, and the military has recently been conducting drills simulating a full-scale military conquest of the entire strip. So it looks like Netanyahu's just going to go on in and scrape the place out and forcibly transfer the Palestinians somewhere out, maybe over to the West Bank. They're going to take Gaza back. Now remember, back when Ariel Sharon was running the show, he made a deal that said that Israel would pull out of Gaza and let the Palestinians have it in exchange for the West turning a blind eye to the illegal settlements being built in the West Bank. And all the way back then, I predicted, once those settlements are facts on the ground, Israel will move to retake Gaza, and it looks like it is about to happen. By the way, a little anniversary we forgot to mention. Yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the murder of Rachel Corrie by the state of Israel. She was out there protesting the home demolitions, and the bulldozer ran over her and then backed up and ran over her again. Israel still insists that it was an accident, that Rachel Corrie positioned herself in a place where the driver of the bulldozer could not see her. Now, looking at the photos that were taken just before it actually happened, it's very clear. Rachel Corrie and the bulldozer operator can clearly see each other. And a few years ago, I actually had an opportunity to climb into that model of bulldozer, and the visibility is excellent. Now, the head of the Gaza committee is saying the problem that they're dealing with right now is the occupation is acting without any deterrence in Gaza. There is no restraint on their behavior whatsoever. No matter what they do, nothing happens. Nikki Haley will protect them up to the United Nations. The corporate media will give them a free pass. And it's just a horrible, horrible situation. Now, there's another article, this came out of Israel-Palestine News, analyzing the Israeli strikes from last weekend. It's very clear that Israel is specifically targeting history and culture. And apparently they targeted the Arts and Craft Village, which is filled with archaeological materials, including pottery, metal crafts, and historical valuables. Israel wants Palestine erased from the map, literally. I still remember the story about that traveling exhibit of Palestinian embroidery, because if you go back and you look at pictures of Palestine prior to the creation of Israel, and you look at the women's fashions, they did this amazing embroidery. And so I think this was about maybe 15, 16 years ago. Gaza put together a traveling exhibit of Palestinian embroidery, which is still a craft that is maintained to today. And it was sent around the world from museum to museum to museum to museum until it got to Los Angeles, when it vanished from a locked cargo warehouse. And everybody's standing around, I don't know. There's no evidence who did it, nothing in the security logs. It just disappeared. Now, for those Palestinians who are given a permit to work in Israel, their paychecks are subject to deductions, like just about anybody else in the world. And supposedly, the money was, part of the money was supposed to be sick leave compensation. And now Israel is saying, well, we're going to take the money and use it to upgrade the roadblocks. They want to take the Palestinians' money to basically strengthen the doors holding them in. There's been another incident where in the West Bank, extremist settlers attacked Palestinian homes and set fire to farmlands. And apparently settlers from the illegal Yitzhar settlement attacked the homes and torched land planted with olive trees. They were protected by the Israeli army. And in fact, in order to protect the settlers who were committing crimes of arson, the Israeli army was literally firing at the Palestinians to keep them away. Now, cranking up the pressure even more, Israel is now blocking fuel shipments to Gaza. And there's basically one crossing known to Palestinians as Karem Abu Salam, was shut down on July 9th, and only items deemed as humanitarian would be allowed to enter Gaza, such as food, hygiene, medical supplies, fuel, animal feed, and livestock. But the Defense Ministry announced on Monday that fuel and gas deliveries will be suspended for security reasons. Now, it amazes me that the idea these people are all being collectively punished and slowly starved to death, as well as being shot at, it isn't a reason for them to be a little upset at what's going on. But Israel's attitude seems to be, we can do to you whatever we want, and you shouldn't get upset. If you get upset, you're being anti-Semitic. You're a Jew hater if you get upset that we're shooting you with butterfly bullets here. But like I said, Netanyahu appears to be goading the Palestinians with these settlers going into the mosques. And now we're hearing that a large-scale military operation is underway. I think they're going to just take Gaza back, forcibly relocate the Palestinians, just deal with the bad press after that. There may be some kind of a false flag attack to justify it. Another one of those bottle rockets will fly over the fence, hit a dirt lot. Do you remember back when President Trump announced he was going to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv, which is Israel's capital, to Jerusalem, and said because they were using the existing consulate building, that the move was only going to cost about $250,000. Well, no. And Trump is not getting the bargain he wanted. Documents filed with the official database of federal spending show the State Department has awarded the Desbuild Limak DNK a contract for $21.2 million to design and build an addition and compound security upgrades for what will soon be the embassy. So that's $21 million. Gee, I thought Trump was a better businessman than that, especially for real estate. Don't suppose he was fibbing, do you? Over in Great Britain, the Jewish labor movement is still trying to lobby for their definition of anti-Semitism, which would include criticism of the actions of Israel's government or any support for Palestine. And the Labor Party's National Executive Committee did adopt a definition of anti-Semitism, but it did exclude criticism of the State of Israel as an example of racism. And the Jewish labor movement wants it back on in there. The only reason that you're criticizing Israel is you're being racist. That's like saying that the only reason anybody ever complained about the Nazis were they were racist. They hated the Jewish people. It's ridiculous, but that is what they are really pushing for. Now, showing a tremendous amount of courage in a politically volatile time, the U.S. Episcopal Church has adopted a series of human rights resolutions which will set up a screening mechanism for Israeli companies. And according to the resolution, the companies will be screened for human rights violations and activities. The number of Episcopal Church members in the U.S. is estimated at 2 million people. So basically, they've adopted a boycott of Israel, and I'm sure already they're being screamed at, you're Jew haters, Holocaust Hitler, blah, 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 blah. Over in North Korea, they're still talking about getting some of the American people who were killed at the start of the Korean War back home in the next 2 weeks. But Trump is saying now that there is no rush for the nuclear negotiations. That they're not in a rush, that, you know, they'll go at whatever pace North Korea wants to go. However, all of the sanctions will remain in place. So I'm not sure exactly what he's trying to do here, because obviously if the sanctions are in place, North Korea is already motivated to try and move those negotiations along. On the other hand, if I am right, and Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in are going to reunify Korea, this gives them more time to do it. Now, this is a very alarming story. This came out of Marine Corps Times, and it quotes Major General John Jansen saying, and he's a two-star, and he says, America is not ready to mobilize for a large-scale conflict. And he was giving a presentation to a group of defense professionals at a National Defense Industrial Association breakfast. And he said, most people's view of World War II is wrong. It's just World War II started, the factories started putting out war munitions, we went off and we beat Germany and Japan. And he would say, it really didn't work like that. That there had been preparations for mobilization years in advance of that. And he doesn't see that we're prepared to do that now. So here we have a two-star who's out there saying, we can't go up. We're not ready to go up against a military peer. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, President Trump has been talking about creating a new branch of the military. It's being referred to as the Space Force, may not be the final name. But he's basically saying he's going to militarize space. Now, this violates a treaty, the Outer Space Treaty, which is recognized by over 100 nations, including the U.S. itself, which signed and ratified it. And the treaty prohibits military action in space. Now, the reality is that the U.S. military has been in space pretty much all along. And a little bit of history from the early days of our space program when we were, beating those Soviets into space. Believe it or not, it was the military that got the first chance to launch a satellite into orbit. And they used a Juno rocket, and they called their project Project Vanguard. And they had 3 launches. All 3 were a failure. And that's what allowed the Soviet Union to get Sputnik up there and claim the prize. They got the gold cup. So the government turned to a civilian agency, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, and basically said, you give it a shot. And so they went on out there with a Redstone missile, and the Explorer one, which was built out at JPL, and they got it into orbit. And as I understand it, it's still up there. Shortly thereafter, NACA became NASA, and we've had a civilian space program. But the military has always lusted after it. And they do have their own launching facilities. We've got the Pacific Missile Test Range. You've got Vandenberg out there in California. So space has been visited by our military quite a bit. Now they're playing with that robotic space shuttle. But again, according to the terms of the Outer Space Treaty, they can be up there for surveillance, spying. But even Reagan's Star Wars would not have been possible, would not have been legal under the Outer Space Treaty. But hey, more money for the military, that's just what this nation needs here. Over at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they're the blue sky people. They're the ones coming up with the wildest of the wild. And they're apparently working on a project to directly connect the brains of soldiers to the weapon systems. So, if you remember the movie Firefox, Clint Eastwood, that Russian plane, supposedly you could launch the weapon systems merely by thinking what you wanted to have happen. And this DARPA project apparently intends to have the weapon systems transmit information back to the soldier as well. Like, we're not doing enough to those poor kids as it is. But that's what they're thinking right now. Meanwhile, Russia has revealed their new anti-satellite warfare plane. And according to Russian defense industry sources, Russia's developing an electronic warfare aircraft which can degrade the effectiveness of American spy satellites or render them useless by using advanced radar jamming technology mounted on the exterior of the plane. Now, the good news is this approach avoids the problem I've talked about before of shattering the target satellite into a cloud of orbiting shrapnel. So somebody over in Russia was really thinking very carefully before they set their policy for anti-satellite weapons. But when a big war breaks on out, it's a guarantee those satellites are going to be the first targets. Blind the enemy just as fast as you can. Since 9/11, the United States government has spent at least $2.8 trillion on counterterrorism, and the task still consumes one-sixth of America's annual discretionary spending. All right, so we're going to start talking here about the economic news, and I guess we're going to go ahead and open up the lines because I got past the important stuff. A lot of people are out there starting to feel the pain of the tariffs, and we're starting to see stories come out from all these different companies saying that the prices are going up and sales are going down. We're getting complaints from like Procter & Gamble, saying that there's been a meaningful impact of tariffs on products in Canada. Kloekner, who's a steel trader, is raising their earnings forecast on higher U.S. prices. The question is, will the volume be there? General Motors is already saying they're going to be forced to cut U.S. jobs if tariffs are applied to imported vehicles and auto parts. Volvo is saying that cars will cost more as the trade wars escalate. And it just goes on from there. Harley-Davidson is apparently changed its mind and wants to move its production overseas. Tyson Foods is saying day-to-day uncertainty in delivering products and services. So this is going to get ugly, and it is very ugly. But our economy's a mess. It's been in a mess for a long time. It's going to collapse. They're just looking to find somebody else to blame for it. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news. And apparently in this last quarter, Chinese startup companies managed to collect more venture capital than newly established U.S. companies in the same time period. And apparently almost half of the venture capital used worldwide was spent on startups from the Middle Kingdom. The American startups were only just over a third. So people are starting to see China is open for business. They're a manufacturing powerhouse. They make things. They make a lot of them. Now, despite talk of China's economy being in trouble, which is coming to you from the same people who insist we only have a 2% unemployment rate, China is investing 9 times more of their money into Europe than into North America. And obviously, a lot of this is being driven by policy changes and the increasing hostility and the tariffs. And it's a secondary effect that I think people who were pushing for the tariffs on China really weren't considering, that Chinese venture capital might go away here in this country. Another article, this one out of Investment Watch blog here, talking about the Federal Reserve. And it is in a bit of a corner. There's no question about that. They're talking about how the Federal Reserve's interest rates hikes could drive the Treasury yield curve to invert right after their September meeting, and a recession could follow by next summer. This is according to Joseph Lavorna, Natixis chief economist for the Americas. And investors have been monitoring that yield curve, or the difference between the shorter maturity Treasury yields and longer duration yields. And markets are fixated on the yield curve since a flattening curve signals potential trouble ahead for the economy. But an inversion, when the short end, or the 2-year note yield, rises above the 10-year yield, it's a reliable warning of a recession. So we're heading into some hard times here. And I'm sure the Democrats are all going to say it's Donald Trump's fault. But no, this economy has been headed this direction for a very, very long time. And successive presidential administrations have refused to look at what was best for the nation as a whole and pandered to Wall Street bankers, gave them the laws they wanted, deregulation, and it's turned into a really huge mess. Now, a federal judge has ruled that Puerto Rico's hedge fund creditors can now sue the federal government over the losses they sustained as the government reorganized the island's finances. And basically, the United States Court of Federal Claims Chief Judge Susan Braden wrote in a document filed Friday that a group of hedge funds invested in Puerto Rico debt could proceed with a lawsuit against the federal government for stiffing them by creating the 2016 Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act, or PROMESA, which set up an oversight board to restructure the island's debt and budget, and obviously failed to do so. By the way, the global debt has surged to nearly $250 quintillion. 250, let's see, 1,000 million, yeah, $250 trillion, $250 quadrillion. A lot of zeros out there. It's easy to get confused. Over at Gold Corp, they're warning that the world is starting to run out of gold. In other words, the mine supply, the supply of new gold coming out of the ground, is getting less and less. Now, geologists are saying there's plenty of gold down there, plenty of diamonds down there too. We just can't get at it with the current technology. And so now we're starting to hear words like peak gold, that we may be at the peak right now. Now, for those already holding gold, this is going to be good news because gold is going to enter a new bull market. If we are at peak gold and we're starting to see shortages in the supply chain, there's no way the manipulators can keep that gold price down much longer. So, all right, let's talk about immigration and all that other good stuff. Unlike California's governor, Texas governor has a new sanctuary city bill which basically says no freebies or help for illegals. The state has enough poor and homeless that need help before non-Americans. And the Texas governor is saying corrupt law officials will be held accountable for not upholding the law. No more open borders, no more illegals before Americans in Texas. And I think that's one of the things that fuels the tensions over this illegal immigrant situation, is that illegal immigrants seem to be getting a better deal from the government than legal American citizens. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she pulled that upset victory in the primaries. She's already backed off her criticism of Israel because now she's looking at November and she needs those pro-Israel donors. So she's already evolving her view on that. But something else that she's come on out and said is a call to literally for an uprising against Trump's zero-tolerance policy at the U.S.-Mexico border. Well, they're illegal immigrants. There is a legal path to immigration in this country, but obviously Ocasio-Cortez is fully on board the open border agenda, and she's calling for people to occupy all ICE offices, borders, U.S. airports, occupy all of it. This is, I think, incitement. And she justifies it saying that she believes the moral character of the United States is at stake, that protecting our borders from illegal immigrants is somehow immoral. No, it isn't. It's prudent. It's pragmatic. Harley Schlanger is out there saying Europe is a mess and there is a lost century ahead between the refugee crisis, which is just trashed the place, and the EU economy is now fragile. If it goes down, it could take down the global economy with it. Over in the Czech Republic, Prime Minister Andrej Babis has rejected Italy's request for European Union states to share out some 450 African invaders picked up from the sea. And he's saying accepting more invaders is the road to heck for Europe. And of course, anytime somebody says they have an issue with illegal immigration or the refugees, oh, you're being a white supremacist, you're a white supremacist, oh, we've got to defeat those white supremacists. Over in South Korea, 500,000 South Koreans signed a petition opposing Muslim immigration. Are you going to start calling them white supremacists too? They want to protect their country. They want to protect their quality of life. They want to protect their way of life. There's nothing wrong with that. Over in Great Britain, a couple of close calls on the vote in Parliament. There's starting to be calls for a new Brexit referendum. We weren't able to cheat the last one. Let's just go and do it again and get past all of this. Polls are showing that more Tories are seeing Nigel Farage as a Brexit leader than Theresa May. And they're basically seeing him as head of the Brexit movement. Theresa May has betrayed them all. There's still talk about a no-confidence vote coming up at some point in the future. But I understand, Theresa May is fighting for her career, fighting for her agenda. Now, earlier in the week, we talked about this very bizarre story where in Texas, there was some nuclear material that was stolen. And apparently it was stolen from some Department of Energy security experts who left it in the back of their truck, parked at a parking lot of a hotel, and it got stolen. Ooh, big surprise there. And police have been searching for the nuclear material. They haven't been able to find it. Now they're just giving it up. They're saying, we don't know where it is. We don't know who has it, if they're making a dirty bomb with it. My question when I read this story is, where is NEST? Now, NEST stands for the Nuclear Emergency Search Team. This is a U.S. government agency that is tasked with finding waylaid, missing nuclear materials. They've got all kinds of vehicles and aircraft fit out with very sensitive scanners to basically find things like this. Why aren't they involved? Now, I understand that there are limits to how far radiation can go. If it gets buried deep enough or it gets put in enough water, the radiation will not get on out. But I'm certainly hoping that whoever stole that plutonium probably didn't realize what it was, threw it away, and it's in the landfill, where it'll now get into the drinking water. Ted Nugent is on tour right now, and he performed in Roanoke, Virginia just last night. Now, he's pro-gun, and in the past he has encouraged and allowed his fans to bring their guns inside the venue, where they could all wave them and scream Second Amendment sentiments. But for this last show, the conference attendees were informed pretty much at the last minute they would not be allowed to bring their guns in. And apparently Ted Nugent's management made that decision in light of some things that had happened, like at the Pulse, and they said it's just not worth opening up the door to an agent provocateur, because that would be a perfect venue for one of the gun grabbers' patsies to go on in and shoot up the place. Of course, he wouldn't get very far. Elon Musk is back in the news. Apparently, things have now smoothed over regarding this mini-sub and the British diver. And apparently what happened is Elon Musk wanted to garner some positive headlines by saying he was going to build this mini-sub that was going to go into this cave that was flooded and rescue these Thai soccer players and their coach, who are now, by the way, all safely out at the hands of regular scuba divers. Nobody got hurt, nobody got lost on that. But one of the divers looked at the plans for the mini-sub and made a rather provocative comment on it, saying that Elon Musk engaged in a sexual act with the mini sub, which is what triggered Elon Musk to come on out and label the guy pedo guy. So the British diver seems to have actually provoked this a little bit, but Musk has now apologized. But I think Musk needs to stop grandstanding and traveling around the world gathering headlines. He's got serious problems over at Tesla. And his entire empire could just dissolve very, very quickly. Here's a story, and this one is very upsetting. This is from mommyunderground.com. And it's talking about how the LGBT activists are trying to now bring their brainwashing, if you will, into the schools. LGBT activists have figured out that ordinary people, adults, we're not buying this transgender propaganda that they're trying to sell. We're not buying the it's okay for men to go into the ladies' restroom stuff. So what they're doing now is changing their tactics, and they want to go after young, impressionable children. And unfortunately, they're actually getting judges to back them up to insert LGBT curriculum in the schools, and at the same time say it's okay for the parents not to be told about it. Now, a lot of parents have been revolting. They're pulling their kids out of the school. Others have organized protests. Parents are very angry about this. Sex in any context, whether straight or gay, is a very sensitive subject. And I can understand why parents want to retain that control over their kids. So it's really silly. All right, we're going to take a phone call now. George in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? There's breaking news in Miramar, Florida. There is the police are telling the protesters blocking the ICE entrance on the road that you better clear the area or you're going to be arrested.
Well, good. I mean, peacefully protesting means that you have an area where you're presenting your petition for the redress of grievances. It's not a license to interfere with other traffic and to block buildings. But again, we're seeing these battle lines literally being drawn. And there's a very real possibility that we could see open conflict in the streets of America between liberals and conservatives, between illegal immigrants and those who want to protect our borders, where there are so many people encouraging violence, like that lady we were just talking about.
Well, about the transgender issue, it was strictly told in my county at the county sheriff, because there was one guy who said he was a woman and became part of the gymnastics team.
Yeah,
and he wanted to shower with the ladies, and the school bureaucrat in the state said that if he says he's a woman, he's allowed to shower with the teenage girls. And the county sheriff posted a deputy at the door of the women's shower saying he's not allowed in there, because if he steps foot in there, he's arrested.
Well, good for him. I mean, there was another story that came out today where apparently a transgender man who claimed to be a woman was arrested and was sent to the women's jail, and he sexually assaulted 4 of the female prisoners before he was finally relocated. I mean, that's how ridiculous this whole thing has gotten.
The thing is, even like my son's Boy Scout troop is sort of like rebelling. They're not allowing transgender or even ladies into the Boy Scouts because they want to keep it normal, because they see how this political correctness is running amok.
Yeah.
How it's this organization. I think a lot of these local Boy Scout troops, the only way you're going to fix the Boy Scouts could be from the bottom up, not from the top down. I mean, the people from the national leadership, even the state leadership, need to be fired.
Okay, George, George, need to do a commercial break. I'm going to put you on hold. Don't hang up. I'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. We're talking with George in Texas. And it's amazing to see this whole transgender thing being pushed as hard as it is. And again, I think what we're seeing is an effort to just get us so confused about who we are that we're easier to control. And that's why they're attacking our history, burning, taking down flags and statues, just trying to get us confused, to destroy our cultural memory, our cultural references, just blur us all together into one herd of livestock that just stands around waiting to be told what to do.
It's kind of funny about, trying to distort our history. On Fox News, they had a Civil War special on Sunday afternoon, on Sunday evening. And I was a rewrite of history, trying to revise it. They were saying the Confederate forces went into the Battle of Gettysburg happened because the Confederate forces went into Pennsylvania to retrieve escaped slaves. Really, and it's like Robert E. Lee was against slaves, and, it was just, a hatchet job. But going back to, my son with the Boy Scouts, it's like the only way the Boy Scouts to reform itself is one way, and that is from the Boy Scout troop, the local chapters up, because there ain't no way you'll be able to reform the leadership unless it happens from the ground up.
Yeah, I would agree on that. But this political correctness movement, it's become a parody. It's become a joke. And we're starting to see a growing backlash against it. And I'll tell you, getting on back to this LGBTQ agenda in the schools, kids shouldn't even be exposed to any of this until they're old enough to start being sexually active. These kids are young and impressionable. They're not being told to accept transgenderism. They're being persuaded to think they themselves are transgender. And again, they're raising a generation of people not sure of who they are, without a strong sense of identity. And it takes a strong sense of identity to decide, what you're going to do in the world, especially when you're met with adversity.
Well, another strange thing is even with my sons from the feminist culture, it's like they're afraid to ask a girl out. I mean, they have a girl they have their eye on, and they want to invite them over. I'm like, you have to ask them, but they're afraid. It's not your typical shyness. It's they are afraid to interact with a woman. And even ladies are afraid to interact with a man like they're monsters.
Yes.
This has to stop. And we parents have to take control and say, tell the ladies, I say, men are not monsters, and don't be afraid if she says no the first time,
Well,
accept rejection.
Some people are monsters, both male and female, and that should be part of a parent's upbringing of their child. Go on out and live your life, but exercise reasonable precautions. But yeah, what is being done to our society? I mean, it is so different from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, guys who wore women's clothes were considered mentally ill. And the Boy Scouts was all boys, and a Boy Scout knife was an 8-inch buck sheath knife, not just this little 20 tools in a handle that they call the Scout knife now. Anything else, George?
No, that's it, Mike. Have a good day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. And we'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we have a caller waiting on the line, Laura in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I had a question for you.
Okay.
I heard a lady last night from South Africa, and she said that last week Obama was in South Africa making some speeches because of some kind of anniversary for Mandela. I wonder if you saw any articles on it or heard what he was speaking about.
No, I really didn't. Obama is keeping his face out there in public, as is Hillary. But I imagine that they're going to be very busy trying to do some fundraisers for the Democrats, because the Democrats are not pulling in the money for the November elections.
And that is very good. Now,
Yes.
I have to tell you, this is a good season to tell Republicans how you feel. I I mean, I was having two Republicans call me for money, and I tell them, hey, didn't APAC, you don't get enough money from APAC? And they go, what are you talking about, APAC? I said, you know you sign a pledge at the beginning of the year with APAC. I said, until your Republicans stop belonging to the APAC party, I said, then I'll give you money.
Well, the Democrats do it too.
Well,
I mean, they all do.
Right. I just take the call and tell them how you feel. Don't just hang up. It's a good time to be able to, you know, get your feelings out. Maybe if they get enough calls with people saying, we know you guys are all in for Israel, that maybe they, you know, get the hint finally. I
would like to see that happen. I would like to see there be like the millions of phone calls going into members of Congress regarding this unholy relationship we have with Israel. But Israel does have a lock, unfortunately, on our government. In fact, we just posted a story a little while ago about how Benjamin Netanyahu was caught on videotape openly bragging to the leadership of the Likud party about how it was he who forced Donald Trump to pull out of the Iran deal. I mean, that definitely does have to stop here.
Yep, exactly. So anyway, I just really like people to realize that this is a good time of year, especially for an election, to talk to these people and tell them how you feel about things.
Yeah, you're right. It generally is. They'll listen, but again, in an age of rampant election fraud and unbridled corruption, it's kind of hard for ordinary people like us to get our voice heard unless there's a mass movement to do that. And today, it's easy for mass movements to get lost with all the, you know, all the stuff going on in the streets here with Antifa and the Occupy ICE. It almost feels sometimes like the nation is starting to tear itself apart. And as I told that caller earlier in the hour, given that I have been predicting a Soviet Union-style collapse for this nation, there's going to be a run-up to it. And this feels to me like the run-up. Anyway, Laura, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go.
More thing? Yes.
I'm sorry?
Mike, I'm concerned about Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court. Picked off Donald Trump. Did you know that he was his wife was a personal secretary to Bush? I didn't know that.
Well, you know, D.C. is kind of a small community. I mean, you know, 6 degrees of separation and all. If you spend your entire life in that group of people, after a while, you know, I don't really see that as an issue. For me, the biggest issue about Kavanaugh is that he was in charge of the cover-up of the murder of Vincent Foster. Anyway, Laura, we're going to let you go and get on back here to the news. Still talking about political correctness here. Over in Great Britain, at least 40 secondary schools have now banned girls from wearing skirts in order to cater to the transgender pupils. The new gender-neutral uniform will be trousers, and other schools are looking at this. It's certainly a better solution than requiring the boys to wear skirts, which we talked about, I think it was a week and a half, 2 weeks ago here. And there's another story where apparently there's this leading private school is now bringing in makeup experts to help pupils who feel anxious about their appearance. How is this in any way, shape, or form an education? And again, I would say that dealing with a child's anxieties about their appearance belongs in the hands of the parents. It really is getting completely out of control there. Alrighty, now the United States is launching a national security probe into uranium imports and asking whether uranium imports threaten national security, which may result in tariffs on the metal. And according to the Commerce Department, the probe will determine whether the present quantity and circumstances of uranium ore and product imports into the U.S. threaten to impair the national security. In other words, do we have enough to keep the bomb machine going here? And I don't know why they're not looking at that uranium-1 deal that Hillary concocted with Russia, because that's the reason we may be looking at shortages. Russia acquired access to 20% of America's uranium through that deal. And Hillary Clinton's foundation got something like $150 million out of the deal. And the United States, because of land sequestration, national monuments, a lot of our native uranium cannot legally be mined. I'm sure in the state of emergency they would get around that. But even before the uranium-1 deal, the United States imported uranium. So why did the uranium-1 deal, why was it allowed to happen? Well, because of money. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Little bit of consumer heads up here. If you use Sprint and you have a toll-free line, you probably better check it. It's probably stopped working. And we had a Sprint toll-free line, cost us about $5 a month, because Claire wanted to have a toll-free number for people in the mainland to reach us, which nobody ever really used, but that's beside the point. Then all of a sudden, we get a phone call from a friend who says, I've tried the toll-free number, it's not working. And I go over to Sprint, and I try and log in, and it says the number just isn't there anymore. So I get onto the phone with customer support, and they say, oh, last January we started ending toll-free for the personal residential accounts. You can still get it if you have a business account, which costs a lot more money. And we sent out letters. You should have gotten a letter. Well, we never got the letter. But if you're on Sprint toll-free for your business or your home, you better check and make sure it's still there. And apparently it's taken them a good part of the year to date to get all of these disconnected. It didn't happen overnight. And it looks like ours stopped about maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago. So let's talk about some stuff with computers. Chrome has acknowledged their new update, which is designed to stop hackers stealing your personal information, does in fact reduce performance. And they released the patch to deal with the Meltdown Inspector design flaws first discovered in January. And this update is enabled by default on 99% of the Google Chrome users across all major operating systems. And they've admitted the latest precautions will come at the expense of speed, saying that performance could be reduced by 13%. Say that 3 times fast. And that's something people really don't understand. The cost of all this security on your computers, and I'm not just talking about the cost of paying for the anti-malware, antiviral software. I'm talking the performance hit on your computer itself. And I remember a while ago, I had this Windows machine, which was loaded up with all the bells and whistles, you know, to keep it secure. And I reformatted the drive to turn it into a Linux box. And I was astounded at the speed improvement. So we're really paying a lot for all this cybercrime. And the government doesn't seem all that interested in looking into the problem, even though the ransomware attacks on hospitals are placing human lives at risk. Now, Google has some other problems as well. The European Union has fined Google $5 billion with a B for freezing out rival firms from its Android smartphone software, and promises more penalties if the search company doesn't pay up in the next 90 days. This is a record-breaking fine here, and it's basically an antitrust penalty for Google. Now, the crux of the issue is the monopoly Google has garnered within the Android app marketplace and the advertising advantage this provides the company. Now, if you remember, Android, the Android operating system, was actually crowdsourced. It was developed open source, and people were using it as, you know, an alternative to other cell phone operating systems. But Google basically got it and started enhancing it and embellishing it and basically made it the heart of all of their smartphones, the Google phones. And here you have these, ordinary people who came up with something that worked really well, and then some corporation gets their hands on it and they muck it all up. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen that happen through the years. Do you remember the old Norton Works? When Norton was still in charge of the company, the stuff all worked great. Then it was acquired, and the next iteration that came on out, all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. One of the weakest areas we have in software development is project management and communication. Because large corporations, thinking it's going to get their software done faster, they'll hire a lot of programmers and they'll spread them way out, and they'll create all these lines of communications to try and get the product out as quickly as they can. But those lines of communication become the blockade. They become the impediment. And it's in those miscommunications that mistakes are being made. Years and years ago, there was a push to develop what was called CASE, C-A-S-E, Computer-Aided Software Engineering, where they wanted to have computer programs write other programs. And I actually briefly worked for a company that did commercial software, but they had programs that wrote the building block modules. And it actually worked pretty well. It actually worked pretty well. But it was a small company where people talk with each other and they get the job done. One of the pieces of software that Claire likes to use is called Sibelius. It's a music notation program. And when we were first exposed to it, it was still being maintained by these two brothers who wrote it. And it worked really well. Then it got acquired by a large engulf and devour type corporation. And now it's picked up all kinds of problems. Adding manpower to a late software project makes it even later. And I think there needs to be a rethink about how software is being engineered in that corporate environment. Maybe go back to the Hewlett-Packard model. Just small little teams working on the project, talking with each other, knowing the code intimately, not just looking at one little tiny part of something that they cannot see the entirety of. All right, let's take a phone call. Melissa in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, I just wanted to touch up on what Laura was saying. I did see on our local Detroit station that they had just a little snippet about Obama going to Africa, and his speech was mainly about, he said something along the lines of, ladies, I don't know what's wrong with our men, that they're just acting so brutishly and they're going crazy, and so he sounded like he was really trying to get the women's votes, I believe, because Michelle or Michael, whatever you want to call her, is going to be running for the next election. So,
well, there's been talk about that. There is talk about that. And again, I'm not buying into this idea that Michelle is anything other than a woman. In any event, until she enters public life, as far as I'm concerned, she's off limits.
Yeah, I agree. But I just wanted to touch up on that and let people know it was on a little local Detroit station here in Michigan, and that's all that they showed. So.
Well, apparently, I remember reading about Michelle Obama was making a speech about how unfair it is that the world expects women to be perfect, but will settle for mediocre men. And the reference was, of course, to Donald Trump.
Of course. But that he was touching up, he was really trying to get the women's attention, and he's like, I don't know what's going on with our men, ladies. I'm sorry for how we're acting, that kind of thing. So it was just a real quick snippet, but they did touch up on that of his speech in Africa. So. Well,
okay. I mean, again, I can't cover absolutely everything that happens in the world, no matter how early in the morning I get up. And I tend to not pay attention to the former presidents and first ladies because the current ones are so interesting.
Agreed. I was just trying to help you out and let you know that I did see someone was talking about it. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate the phone call, and I appreciate the insight. And it almost looks, from what you're saying, that Obama is playing the same gender politics at that speech that Hillary ran on in 2016. Divide and conquer.
yep, I believe so. So I'm thinking with his buy-in at Netflix, I'm really thinking that they're going to try to push Michelle Obama to be the next president. So I'm really thinking that it's all part of his little chess piece game. You know, he's moving on up. He's trying to divide and conquer. So.
Well, it's going to be interesting because it looks like Hillary wants to take another stab at the White House in 2020, and that will be interesting. So my advice to Michelle is stay out of small airplanes.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. Talking about the world of computers here. And we're talking about, what we're talking about now is artificial intelligence. And there's this very interesting story that came out of China. Apparently, China has put together an artificially intelligent system to provide diagnosis on brain tumors. And apparently it works faster and more accurately than the human doctors. Now, it's called BioMind. It's developed by Beijing's Tiantan Hospital, and its AI Research Center for Neurological Disorders has told Chinese media that the new system has correctly diagnosed 87% of 225 cases in only 15 minutes. That compares to only a 66% accuracy rate for the same by a team of 15 senior physicians. So, yeah, we may be getting to a point right now where the artificial intelligence machines will simply tell the doctor what to do. You know, write more prescriptions. As you know, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the, excuse me just a second here. Early in the show, I was talking about how we're literally starting to see a war between the corporate media and the government and the independent media. And so apparently Democratic Representative Ted Deutsch from Florida actually called on Facebook today to block and ban InfoWars content online on the platform. And it's like they're not even trying to hide their intolerance and their desire for dictatorial control over everything that we see, hear, and read online. And it's why I'm saying, social media, we need to change. We need to go to other platforms. The current corporate social media is a complete waste of time unless you're really into funny kitten videos. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about what is now becoming a very overt effort by the powers that think they are to silence independent media and the internet. We were talking about how Democratic Representative Ted Deutsch is calling on Facebook to block and ban InfoWars. That's how open this is getting. And part of this, of course, may be predicated on the fact that Hillary Clinton is supposedly going to be running again in 2020. And she has to know that it was the independent media that balanced out all the pro-Hillary rah-rah coming from the corporate media. And so they're trying to find a way to shut it down and find some way to get around that First Amendment. And of course, you know, people who are out there defending social media for banning certain sites are the same ones who were screaming when that baker refused to make a wedding cake for a gay wedding. So again, it's more of the liberal hypocrisy. But apparently, there's been a new study that shows Facebook has eliminated 93% of traffic to top conservative websites since the 2016 election. They're not social media anymore. They're gatekeepers. And they're there to help promote the liberal propaganda and to silence conservatism. Now, over at Natural News, Mike Adams has released a new report that outlines how the tech media giants, Facebook, Google, YouTube, and Twitter, are working in tandem to deny tens of millions of Americans access to news and information the social media corporations find politically objectionable. We object to that. And it's systematic censoring of certain political viewpoints, conservative viewpoints. It's a blatant denial of their rights to exist in today's increasingly internet-connected world. So they just want the whole world to be aligned with the left's groupthink. And all else is forbidden. All else is forbidden. Now, if you think the tech giants merely want to ban InfoWars, no. They'll be going after other websites. They'll be going after websites that talk about vaccine safety, vaccine side effects, because after all, that cuts into the profits of the big pharmaceutical corporations. And, you know, we can't tolerate anything that cuts into profits. They'll be going after any websites that discuss the health benefits of CBD oil or cannabis medicine. Same reason. It's cutting into big pharma's profits. Criticisms of Democrats or the liberal media, they'll be going after that as well. Medication side effects, the dangers of psychiatric drugs, again, got to protect the profits of big pharma. They're going to be going after websites that talk about self-reliance and prepping. They need you to be dependent on the government because dependency is slavery. Going to be going after websites about natural cures and herbal remedies, again, protecting the profits. Any political discussions that aren't approved by the authoritarian left, they'll be going after that. They'll go after websites that are pointing out the censorship itself. They'll be going after websites that have discussions of history from a pro-liberty point of view. America, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Remember, there was a while back where schools under Common Core were trying to teach kids that George Washington and the Founding Fathers actually technically were traitors and shouldn't have stood up to the authority of King George III. That was bad, bad. Websites that criticize transgenderism or the LGBT agenda, they'll be going after that. We've gone into this new phase of LGBT militantism and just they should have stopped with acceptance. We all accept them. Fine. You know, do what you want to do. We're going to live our lives. You live it. Now they're just trying to force it in front of us. Force it in front of us. And if we just say, whoa, back down, they scream that we're being intolerant. Websites that talk about protecting national borders or border security, they'll go after those. Any website dealing with the Second Amendment is going to be targeted. Any website that opposes abortion or talks about homeschooling, they're all on the list to be targeted, to be purged and scrubbed. Winston Smith, pick up your white courtesy telephone, please. Interestingly enough, at the same time, Facebook gives special protection to Tommy Robinson and allows people to racially abuse immigrants, according to this new report. An undercover reporter filmed the people who review content to decide whether it should stay up to be viewed, and got this insight into what is allowed to be posted on the forum. And apparently included graphic images, videos of children, violent hate speech, racist content. They're not automatically being removed, just conservative content. You see all the liberal incitement out there. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about, well, social media, actually. It turns out Facebook's Instagram has up to 95 million bots. And apparently, it's just another way of making Instagram look more popular than it really is. And the bots apparently are simply posting photos of things found elsewhere on other websites. So we have seen in the past, well, we have seen in the past where social media or even corporate media artificially inflate their readership, viewership, user numbers. There was a big stink a while back where the websites of some of the big national newspapers were found to being hit with these click bots to make it look like more people were reading there. And we don't do any of that stuff here at whatreallyhappened.com or republicbroadcasting.org. We don't need to. Now, I just got an interesting little email from somebody who says the way that you explain what's happening with the Boy Scouts of America is to look at who's running it. And apparently, Robert Gates, after leaving the Obama administration, was elected president of the Boy Scouts of America, and apparently he's a hardcore globalist. So he's going to be fully on board with whatever the globalist agenda is. Now, here's an interesting little story. This goes back to the shooting at the Mandalay Bay. And MGM Resorts owns the Mandalay Bay, and they also own the venue where the concert was taking place. And there are a lot of people who are suing or planning to sue on behalf of deceased relatives or on behalf of injuries they sustained. And MGM has turned the tables and filed a lawsuit against all the survivors of the incident, saying all these lawsuits should be dismissed, we're not responsible. And the excuse that they're using is that the case has to be dealt with in federal court under the terms of the Post 9/11 Safety Act, which provides incentives for development and deployment of anti-terrorism technology. And MGM is saying that they contracted with a security firm, CSC, for the concert, that CSC is approved by the Department of Homeland Security and thus is released from liability under the Act. Well, if you can't sue MGM, then sue CSC, because somebody obviously did not do the job they were supposed to do to have so many people killed. But I don't think this is going to be very good for MGM's image or that of the Mandalay Bay. It is kind of bizarre here. All right, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, finally appearing to do their job, has issued a voluntary recall, meaning that the companies are not required to comply. But they've issued a voluntary recall of several medications used to treat high blood pressure and heart failure over concerns over an active ingredient in the drugs that is a cancer-causing agent. Now, the agency is reporting the traces of, let me see if I can pronounce this, N-nitrosodimethylamine, NDMA. It's a probable human carcinogen, and it's found in the active ingredient valsartan in the recalled products. Now, the FDA noted not all products containing valsartan are contaminated and being recalled. The valsartan contained in the recall was supplied by a third party. So, companies that have recalled valsartan products are Major Pharmaceuticals, Solco Healthcare, Teva Pharmaceuticals Industries Limited, Solco Healthcare, and Teva Pharmaceuticals. Okay, here is my question. Why do we keep finding cancer-causing chemicals in our medications? I think that's an area of concern because is the medical industrial complex so cynical, so desperate for more money, that they want to make us sick? Maybe. If we were all healthy, the whole shebang would come crashing down. We're looking at a situation where some of the myriad 21st century ailments that are hitting us all may be reactions to earlier medications. They're now figuring out Crohn's disease has to do with disruption of the gut biome, which can be caused by the chemicals in the food that we eat. But instead of saying, let's get healthier chemical-free food into the supermarkets, no, we've got a pill. We'll sell another pill out there. We look at things like autism and peanut anaphylaxis, which have just exploded ever since the introduction of vaccination on a massive scale. There's something going on there. But it's making money. And in the United States, that's all it really takes. We got to make the money here. Now, getting on back to Flint, Michigan, as you know, back in 2014, they shifted their drinking water source to a local river to save money. And even worse, they didn't add the chemicals into the water system to protect the piping. And so residents started getting this terrible smelling, murky water spewing from their taps. They were ignored for a long time. But as it turned out, they were being poisoned by lead contamination from years of industrial waste dumping into that river. And eventually they had to declare a state of emergency. Since then, it's turned out this is a problem all across the country. And it represents a failure of the civil government, which for the most part operates the public waterworks. Now, it turns out in Watts, in Southern California, Watts, with the Watts Towers, bears a lot of similarities to Flint. It's another impoverished community, and apparently they're starting to see their water system is doing exactly the same thing the one in Flint, Michigan did. And the officials are reluctant to address the situation as they were in Flint, Michigan, until it's so totally out of control and people are getting sick. Our nation really has gone downhill. And it's mostly through neglect. All of the wealth of the nation goes into the pockets of the money junkies, Wall Street, Israel, and of course, these endless, endless wars. We're in a wartime economy. That's the best way to describe it. If you talk to anybody who was a civilian during World War II, they'll tell you about shortages of essential goods for the population and how infrastructure was allowed to decay on the idea that after we win the war, we'll build it all back up, which did in fact happen. But back then they had room to build new communities. Not so much here anymore. It does sometimes feel like things can't go on the way they are right now. Something has to break. Something has to fail. The whole web of corruption is just strung tight like the Gordian knot. Okay, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and I could use a couple more phone calls to get us out of the show today. Apparently, Elon Musk is having a problem as Model 3 buyers are starting to say they're losing patience and some of the tax credits after waiting 2 years for the car. And that is a real problem because a lot of people were induced to buy the Teslas or any electric car because of tax credits. And there's a waiting list right now of 420,000 worldwide. But there's a phase-out, a looming phase-out of a $7,500 federal tax credit that will make the cars much more expensive. This could all really fall apart. And the production line is delayed. It's got serious problems. They've set up a second production line or an additional production line inside a tent, literally. And I feel bad because the Teslas look good. I couldn't possibly afford one myself. But I've seen a Tesla One up close. And I do think electric cars are the way of the future. I do get annoyed when people say it's clean. Because they aren't, not yet. Electric cars in general are not clean. It's just the pollution is happening someplace else. And I was talking to somebody who had an electric car plugged into the free electric charger down at the shopping mall. And across the side of the car was emblazoned, environmentally friendly. And I said, how do you justify that? He said, well, you know, we're not putting out carbon emissions. I said, the power plant that's generating that electricity going into your battery does. I could see this sort of like shocked look. They hadn't really thought about that. It's just electricity is clean and I've got an electric car. The electricity has to come from someplace. Okay, now then. Apparently housing starts and applications are both down. That's a bad sign for the economy. A school board in Lee County, Virginia has now voted to arm the school staff. That makes 19 states that now have programs in place to arm the school staff. And I think it's really a good idea as long as they are properly trained and are forced to go through retraining on a regular basis. All it's going to take is one dumb accident and the gun grabbers are going to say, see, this doesn't work. Confiscate the guns, confiscate the guns, confiscate the guns. So, and this is saying the same whether you think these mass shootings are the real deal, some loser with his brain melted on prescription psychiatric medication, or if you think they're being staged. Oh, and getting on back to the attack on Alex Jones, apparently he's now being sued by one of the parents at Sandy Hook. I don't know what grounds the lawsuit is on, but they're trying to lawfare him to death. Roger Stone has had to start a GoFundMe campaign to deal with his rising legal costs. And they make up stuff about Alex Jones. Somebody was out there saying that Alex Jones said there were no real victims at Parkland, which he never said at all. So that war is definitely on. Okay, let's see. We already talked about the voting machine here. And apparently San Francisco has begun registering non-citizens, including undocumented immigrants, to register to vote Monday in the November election for the city school board. They're limiting it just to the school board. But it's the camel's nose under the tent. They just want to get people used to the idea that in certain circumstances, illegal immigrants should be allowed to vote. And then they'll push for more, and oh, it should be here, and it should be here, and it should be here. They're just, it's a mess out there. Do you know out in California there was this illegal alien who attacked his wife with a chainsaw? He'd been deported 11 times and just walked back on in, I guess carrying his chainsaw, and attacked his wife. We're not getting good people from this process. We're getting the people Mexico's glad to get rid of. So, all right. I do need a couple of phone calls if you don't mind. I don't know why I ran out of talking points. You know, on days when not a lot is happening, this can happen. All right, so I'll just pick a subject and start talking. We were talking the other day about NASA sort of dancing around the idea that there could be, maybe once was, life on Mars, and the growing body of evidence that suggests that Viking did in fact this. Oh, we got a caller. I'm saved. I'm saved. I'm saved. All right, Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's up there, Mike? Hey, Mike, I was going to talk to you first about Brenham, but now something like you just caught my attention because I just talked to him on the phone a few minutes ago. The great patriot Wolfgang Halbig. Yes. And I just want you to know he's on trial together with Alex Jones. They're all on trial together in I believe it's in Bridgeport. I'm going to try to find out transcripts of the trial tonight to see if I can dig it up. It's going to be at the federal courthouse in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Thing is that I don't know how many people know this, but that guy Leonard Posner, who is who's supposedly the father of that kid Noah Posner, who actually managed to get himself killed twice in a terrorist act. First in versus Sandy Hoax, and then he got killed again in Pakistan at a school, at a military school in Pakistan in a terrorist attack.
Okay,
anyway.
well, I want to back up here a bit. I thought that the case against Halbig himself had been dropped over the discovery process. Where,
Yeah,
okay, so this is a new case.
Hey, the old case you're talking about, Posner didn't show up. He just refused to show up because he had no case. He knew he would have to show that the child he's talking about doesn't exist, or is maybe a lot older now, and they just took pictures of the kid when he was little. He didn't show up. That's the whole thing. And I think something like this is going to come up again. People got to know this. This got to be passed around. This is a total hoax. Nothing else. I believe the one in Parkman, people really got killed, but I don't believe it was Cruz that did the shooting. I think it was those four, whoever they were, in body armor that snuck out the back of the school. Wolfgang thinks that too. And,
Yeah,
you know,
I'm in
I
agreement.
think.
Well, you know, he designed the security system, the TV system at Parkland. He was on my show shortly after that happened, and he basically said that the cameras should have caught everything inside. This idea that the cameras weren't working, or they weren't turned on, or there was a 20-minute delay, he says it's all nonsense. Anyway, Mark, stay on the line. We've got to take another break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina about this lawsuit against Alex Jones and Wolfgang Halbig, brought by some of the parents from the Sandy Hook area. And I'm not exactly sure what it is that they're claiming, but ultimately there are two issues that work in favor of Alex Jones. And that is, first of all, that we have a First Amendment right to express our opinions about anything, and certainly to point out the inconsistencies in the official story, of which there are many. Second is a legal concept called absence of malice. I think in order to win any kind of a judgment against Alex Jones and Wolfgang Halbig, the parents are going to have to say or prove that they acted out of malice, that they intended some kind of harm or hurt by reporting as they did. And they're really not going to be able to do that because there was, as far as I can tell, no malice whatsoever. But it may not be the intention of the lawsuit to actually win the case, but merely to bankrupt Alex Jones and Wolfgang Halbig, to silence them. And this has become a new tactic in the hands of the deep state. It's called lawfare, where they're filing lawsuits against anybody they don't like to just bankrupt them and drive them, off the scene. And that may be what's going on here. Now, I don't know about Wolfgang Halbig. I don't think he's well off. I would hope that InfoWars actually carries litigation insurance. But we'll see what's going to happen on that. But I would appreciate it if you would email me updates on what you find about this thing, because I do want to stay on top of this, because even though Alex Jones and I don't agree on a few subjects, we all have to, as Ben Franklin said, we all must hang together, or surely we will hang separately. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. They're going after Alex Jones because he is a prominent icon in the world of independent media. But we're all potential targets for this kind of skullduggery.
Mike, I don't know if you know that Wolfgang printed something out on Facebook recently about the meals, the food that the schools are ordering. And the schools are ordering, none of those, he traced it down to some place in Texas that was providing the food.
Yes.
None of that lining up a so-called school that supposedly got shot up. That school has been closed. That went to the other school in the area around Newtown, Connecticut. It didn't go to the Sandy Hoax school. Sandy Hoax school evidently was condemned and wasn't even being used. This is a total hoax. Now, again,
I remember looking at the photos of the school itself and seeing all kinds of health and safety violations where you wouldn't think school kids would be allowed into a building that deteriorated. There was all kinds of mold. The guard railings were cracked and broken. And Wolfgang makes a really good case. The question is, do they have a judge that is willing to basically say, yeah, you have a reasonable grounds to doubt the official story, or if they've managed to shop a judge who is just going to railroad Alex Jones and Wolfgang Halbig, into silence.
I think it's going to be a jury trial.
Okay, all right, well, even better if it's a jury trial. All right, well, listen, there's the music. It's time for me to get on out of here. Thank you for the call, Mark. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. And please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know. Stay off of social media. It's a total waste of time these days. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.